So I'm going to show you how to use Jekyll. That is the software engine that sort of underlies GitHub Pages in order to reclaim your domain. Part one of this lesson lives on my blog. In it details some of the things that you're going to need to do before you get to this step, right? But for our purposes today, the first step is that you've signed up for a GitHub account and that you're ready to create a new repository. A repository is simply a collection of files of code. Sometimes it indicates the source code for an application. Sometimes it's a piece of a larger application. In our case, it's the collection of files that will eventually become a website. So let's create a repository. Let's call this one Pigeons, because pigeons, oh my God, Skinner was right click here, peck now, right? We'll make it public. We're going to initialize it with a README file. That really just helps the whole GitHub system along. I'm not going to choose I'm not going to choose a software license right now because that's actually a whole other screencast. I'm just going to click the Create Repository button. So as you see, we've created one whole file folder of code. The only file that lives in it is the README file. You can see that this repository also has just one branch. That's a really important feature of GitHub, or I think more accurately of Git, right? So Git allows us to have separate branches, versions, and forks of a repository, right? Of a folder or an archive or a collection of code or files. It allows us to have multiple copies of the code. They can exist, they can be distributed, they can be worked upon at once, they can be reconciled back to the original, or they can go off into their own directions. It's frightening when it's your writing. It's more logical perhaps when it's coding, but it really is a feature of this notion of Git, right? So let's click on settings. And let's actually not worry about Git right now, right? And let's be lured instead by this promise of GitHub Pages to be able to create a beautiful site for your project with their GitHub Pages generator. How can we do anything with such a command but hit automatic page generator? So GitHub is going to automatically create a website for our repository. And it's going to do so if you are familiar with this sort of language in Markdown. Markdown is really sort of a language I like to think of as what writers use to bypass the sort of weight of having to write up everything in HTML. Don't worry about that. Again, click the next button. When they say beautiful sites in GitHub Pages, know that this isn't actually what you're stuck with. Pick one of these layouts, it really doesn't matter, and publish your pages. So you're going to notice a couple things right now, right? So you're going to notice now that your GitHub repository has two branches. It has the master branch and it has this new branch, GitHub Pages. What we want to do is we want to go back into settings and we want to make sure that all of the changes that you're making are to that particular subsection of your repository. The default branch, if you're just using this to build a website, is definitely going to be GH Pages. And when you go back, you'll find in this repository, you've got a series of files that create your website. So me personally, I use GitHub's desktop software to be able to make changes to the files. Most of the time, I use GitHub's software to make changes to the files that I use. So what I want to do is go and open it up. I'm going to be able to clone. That verb works just like it sounds. Make an absolute duplicate copy of the Pigeons repository. to my desktop. The repository knows that I prefer working in GitHub Pages. So what it's done is it's made a duplicate copy of these files that exist here, now exist on my local machine. Right? So I can make a change to my site and then decide whether or not I want to make the copy to my machine. A couple of other things. So what happens when GitHub Pages does this is it's going to make a new file at audreywaters.com.github.io/pigeons, right? So my username .github.io/ the name of my repo, and that's actually the website where this GitHub Pages are manifest. So you can see now on the website is this wonderful half homage to the beauty of Skinner, or something like that, right? So one of the great things about the way in which GitHub Pages works with this distributed file system is I have this local copy that I can make changes to. When I make changes locally, they don't actually change that repository online unless I ask them to. So I can actually delete, to trash all the files in that repository, and it doesn't change the existence online of that file until I make those changes, push my changes locally to the changes on the web. It doesn't matter. So that's pretty interesting. The other thing is I can actually get rid of that ugly look. I can go to something like Jekyll Themes, and I can find some different themes for my site. I use this one. People say your site looks a lot like Medium purposefully. I've used this particular Jekyll theme to run Hack Education and audreywaters.com. So let's go to Dirk's GitHub repo. Let's download a copy of it. I could clone it to my desktop, but I'm just going to download a copy and replace all of his files. So let's go to downloads, unzip that. So I'm going to take all these files and I'm going to overwrite them with what I deleted in Pigeons. Right. So the repo that was Dirk's Mediator repo is now living in a totally duplicate copy in Audrey Waters' Pigeon repo. We'll go to my GitHub software and we'll be able to commit those changes. So you can see here that every time you see a green change, that's something new in GitHub. This is an interesting, so I had an old index page. That was what served up this ugliness, right? Was actually the index.html page. Now you can see that the HTML header is gone. What we have instead is some of the Jekyll language. Green is new, red is old. And anytime you make a change to any GitHub file, you'll be able to reconcile these sorts of changes. For me, this is really useful in terms of editing to see what I've changed. So let's add a reminder. Old template is old. New template is new. We'll commit that to GitHub Pages. We're going to sync it with the master distribution, with the master repo on GitHub. And the next video will talk a little bit more about the next steps from there.